right, so as you can see by the chronograph test, not that impressive. We barely hit the high 60s. We never hit over 70. So yeah, maybe that's okay if you're an 8-year-old, not if you are a Spartan and are dealing with Master Chief. But we can make it better. Mod guide now. So before we start actually modding this blaster, I just want to go over a couple things that you're going to need. You're going to actually want some wire. We have 18 gauge here. I'm going to be using red and black of those things. That you can use 16 gauge if you want, but I find that 16 gauge is a little bit less maneuverable, but you definitely want something that is less, or I should say, thicker than 20 gauge wiring. So we're going to definitely need that. You're going to want to have some flux, of course. You know, you can do soldering without flux. I've done it before, but the flux does help. Also, you're going to want to have a couple of 3S motors. In this case, I'm using Krakens. Crackers, Jesus. Anyways, Krakens that I actually got from Out of Darts. And then you're also going to want to have a cage. This flywheel cage actually comes from Out of Darts as well. It is a 39.5, so it is a high crush cage, definitely good, and it is made for Daybreak flywheels. Of course, if you have Kepler flywheels, you can use those as well. Speaking of which, here are my Daybreak flywheels, also courtesy of Out of Darts. You are also going to want to have a 15 amp switch. So this switch, of course, you can get these micro switches off of Amazon. They're usually like around 10 for $8 around there, so they're not too expensive, and you buy that and you can make a lot of different modifications with these. You do want to get the one with the stem itself, only because of the fact that it's easier when it comes with the rev trigger. The next thing you're going to want to have, and this is just a bonus, not a mandatory thing, you're going to want one of these. This is a magnetic plate to catch all of your screws. And you are also going to definitely need some wire snips. Now, these snips can actually double as plastic cutters, which, you know what, they do come in handy, especially if you don't have a Dremel tool. If you do have a Dremel tool, you can actually just use the sanding tool to sand down what you need, especially when it comes to the battery cover. Or not the battery cover, the battery dividers. Now, this is something that you can actually buy. I got this from Containment Crew. It is pretty neat. This is actually a switch plate. This saves you from having to use putty or hot glue to hold the switch in place so that it activates with the rev trigger. It is designed specifically for this particular blaster. They actually do make these for all sorts of blasters. Out of Darts has ones for the Strife. They have them for the Raven. However, if you don't have one of these, you are going to need some of this. This is steel stick putty. You actually just take this, you cut it apart using a hobby knife, and then you're going to actually want to use some gloves, some nylon gloves, to go ahead and actually mush up the putty and mold it, because it can be toxic and harmful to your skin. Please do not use this around small children. I will warn you that it does have a distinct odor once it activates, kind of like, for lack of a better term, cat piss. But now you know. Also, you are going to need a soldering iron and some soldering wire. I actually prefer that you use a higher grade soldering wire, only because of the fact that it's easier to stick to the iron itself. I have used some of the cheap stuff that comes with some of the soldering iron kits, and yeah, it just doesn't work that well. So, you know, this isn't that expensive. Pay for it. You're going to use basically not that much of it. This should last you about, I don't know. Yeah, I've done about 20 mods with this spool since I've opened it, and I've only maybe used one entire wraparound, so, well, it's still pretty heavy too. So, and then, of course, you are going to want to have a trusty screwdriver. Here it is, precision screwdriver. I actually have multiple different heads with this. You saw my motorized screwdriver before. Unfortunately, that one kind of took a dump on me again, so I said, I'll just stick with manual, and this one works pretty well. Plus, the actual bits are from the old screwdriver, which if I really needed a little bit extra oomph, I can actually grab my Ryobi drill and go to town with this. The other thing you're going to want to have is a LiPo battery. So I recommend the Tattoos Tattoo, this is an 850. It has an XT30 connector. It fits perfectly inside of these blasters. You don't have to do too much sanding or cutting with a Dremel in the actual battery tray with this. So just remember. Now, because of the fact that this has an XT30 connector, I have an actual XT30 connector, male portion here, or yeah, I believe this is the male. Yep, this is the male. That is already pre-wired with, I want to say this is 16 gauge wiring. That should not be a problem. When I actually solder the wires together and put the heat shrink on there, it's going to be just fine. Now, I actually have already gone ahead and unscrewed the blaster, so I'm going to go ahead and switch views now. That way you don't have to worry about seeing me do all that screwdriver work when it actually comes to taking it apart. And yeah, we'll shorten the video. Also, quick little shameless plug, and I'm unpaid for this. Because of the fact that modding work is thirsty work, this mod guide is unofficially sponsored by Diet Coke. Why? Because I'm thirsty and I need caffeine. All right, so first things first, I'm going to point out is that the blaster is a little bit too large to fit on the camera view right now. However, this is the important part of the blaster. This is where we're going to be working because the motor is here, trigger's here, and yeah, battery plate's over here, but you know what? We'll get to that when we need to. So this should be unscrewed already, and it should just clamshell open. Go and remove the battery cover and pull this blaster apart. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and actually paint this blaster this time around. I do have one that has been painted, and it is pretty easy to paint because when I flip these over here and you see all the screws, all of these pieces come together. This green trim is its own piece. So you literally just pull this apart and you can paint everything. This black piece comes off. This black back end comes off. This part right here, that actually does not pop off. So that part would be painted over if you decided to paint it. But other than that, this part, it all pops off. This you would have to paint. I don't even know exactly what the purpose of this thing is, but it's there. It looks neat, I guess. Whatever. So I guess it's supposed to be a faux priming handle to activate the ammunition. But, all right, so let's go ahead and actually dump out these screws here. Okay, so got the screws out and they are all on my little plate here, so I have them ready for when I need them. Good news is that I've done enough modifications on blasters and I've had a couple of failures, so if I need to find an extra set of screws, I can just plug them right in. Now, I do want to go ahead and point out there's a lot of locks on this blaster. You have the actual rev trigger here. You have the lock here that makes it so that you actually must have a magazine loaded in order for it to rev up. And then you have one that is hidden back here, right around back here, that it requires you to have the jam door closed in order for you to rev the trigger. We are going to remove all of those plus the motor. So let's start with removing the motor. Let's get a screwdriver here. You're going to want to keep these screws handy because these screws are what's going to hold your new motor cage in place. I will tell you that for ease of use, you want to remove this tube only because it gets in the way. Feed this switch through here. Of course, if you want to just snip everything off, you could, but you know what? I'm trying to avoid cutting as much as possible, because I want to show you how this all works. Now, We are almost done taking that all apart. For this part here, I'm actually going to go ahead and get my soldering iron up because I'm going to heat this up to melt the solder, and that way we can just pull on this wire and get it out. Okay, so one thing I do want to point out really quick, and sorry about that quick little cut. One thing I did is I actually disconnected the actual trigger from the original system here, and I replaced just the actual rev trigger itself here, or the trigger lock itself, only because of the fact that when you insert a magazine here, it's going to press down there, and when you take the magazine out, that'll pop back out. That little notch actually fits into most magazines, and it helps to hold them in place. That way you don't have to worry about just pulling out the actual magazine. Of course, if that's something that you don't want to worry about, you can just go ahead and actually take that out and remove it. There is one more lock here, and this is the one that actually controls the trigger itself. You can actually trim this if you wanted to. That is what pushes down. You can trim that piece, and we might go ahead and actually do that now with a hobby knife. By sanding that down or by trimming that, that allows you to actually pull the trigger whenever you need to once you rev, and you can just go from there. I am actually going to go ahead and actually trim that. That way this will also hold the magazine in place, and I don't have to worry about having the magazine to pull the trigger, because sometimes you just want to be able to not have to worry about the magazine. So let's go ahead and get my hobby knife here and make some cuts. Not the cleanest cut, but it should work. And as you can see, that little notch is no longer trapping the trigger. We can just disable that by doing this, and it moves freely. All right, now, so that is pretty much it for here. Of course, we are going to have one little spot over here that we want to take care of really quick, and that is removing these battery terminals. Not going to need these, so let's get them out. So we're pretty much done with the shell part itself, except for when the time comes for us to put the actual switch plate in. But first we want to actually get the switch itself soldered up together so we can actually take care of all this stuff. Alright, now these are not mandatory, however, they are pretty helpful. There's a set of helping hands. Yes, I know, I'm horrible. I used a bad word choice there. They're helpful. Get it? They're helping hands. Alright, anyways, yeah. I'll not quit my day job to become a comedian anytime soon. So let's go ahead and actually get this part started. We have our Kraken motors. And where did our cage go? It is right here. Now, most of these motors, you'll see that they each have a red dot. That is the positive connection. Now, the way that you want to mount these things is you want to make sure that one side has a red dot, and then the opposite red dot goes on the other side. So we go here, and then here. Now, in this case, they did not mark which side's positive, which side's negative. So we're going to wire and hope for the best. Of course, do not be surprised if you wire one side and the motors go backwards. That is a common mistake, and it's just a matter of switching it over. But by doing this way, you don't have to worry about crossing wires over each other, and it just makes the job a lot easier. Of course, the first thing you're going to want to do before you actually start soldering is that you're going to want to take these screws and you're going to want to mount the motors into the cage itself properly. Okay, so I made a mistake because there is one piece that we want to add to here. And it's not something that is mandatory, but it is something that I prefer to use only because that way you don't have to worry about a lot of noise when you actually rev your motors up. And that is some silicone spacers. so now that we actually have the motors mounted in there, the next part that we're going to want to take care of are the flywheels. So we're going to open up our flywheels now, and we're going to make sure that these fit securely in there. Of course, the important part about the flywheels is pressing them down enough that they fit inside the actual cage itself, but not so tight that they don't move. Also, the other most important part is making sure that they are even. All right, so as you can see, they are pretty even, and we are able to rotate these without a problem. So yeah, these are pretty well mounted. Now, of course, we're going to flip over here. One of those things that you can actually know that the dart goes in from this side and it should go out from this side. So let's start soldering. Just a small amount of flux. Now, we're also going to want to measure out how much wire we're going to need, only because of the fact that you don't want to have too much wiring. So this will go to the switch, which it's about, I'd say that's about 8 inches, maybe about 9 inches of wiring total. So if I did measure wrong and it's too short, I can always cut some more wire and solder some more. Now you'll see what I did there was that I just cut enough so that it cuts the silicone itself. That way I can actually peel this layer back off and expose the wire underneath. That just prevents you from having to solder multiple wires together, and you can just keep one long piece of wire. And then if I measure it right, that should fit perfectly. Okay, so helping hands to the rescue here. That is connected there. It's probably not my best soldering job, but it'll do. And that is soldered there as well. Now, this end of the wire, we're going to want to go ahead and actually put on this part of the switch, which is labeled COM. Okay, so that wire is now soldered on there. And of course, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually solder a length of wire. This part is going to need to be about, I want to say about 6 inches long, only because of the fact that this needs to connect to your XT30 connector or XT60, whichever you decide to use. comes to the switch itself, this part, you're going to want to actually go ahead and connect to on 3. You do not want to connect it to on or NC2 or 1. You want to actually connect it to the closest one to COM, only because of the fact that that way, when if you connect it to this one down here, the actual battery power will always be on unless you actually pull the rev switch. This way, the battery power is only on when you pull the rev switch and you actually click it like that. All right, so we are ready now to actually connect the wire to the XT30 connector. But first, I'm actually going to get some heat shrink. That way, we can actually make this look really nice. Okay, so you really can't see it on camera necessarily, but there is some heat shrink that is threaded to this side, the part that is connected to the switch. Then I have my XT30 connector here. I will tell you that the hardest part about soldering this area is, well, making sure that the helping hands are aligned properly to make it easier for you. This is where the helping hands are kind of necessary, to be honest. That's actually a pretty decent solder job. That's actually really good. So that is tight. Now we're going to actually move the heat shrink here, thread it through. Now, if you don't have a heat gun, all you really need to do is use your soldering iron and use the side to just heat it up. And this will activate the heat shrink, cause it to shrink. Now, if you don't feel comfortable using a soldering iron like this, that's okay. You can also just run a lighter close to it. The heat from the lighter, when you actually light it up, should cause it to shrink pretty well, but this does not burn anything except for your fingers. And that's it. So pretty decent job. Of course, now comes the black wire. So we have about, I want to say, almost 10 inches of black wire. This is going to be for the negative side. I will tell you that because of how large the shell is, where the battery is at, if I have a little bit more of the negative wire, it doesn't matter as much because I can always glue it down and hold it in place. There is nothing there that's going to jam up by having too much wire on the front side closer to the battery tray, but you don't want as much of the positive wire because you have to worry about the trigger. That's actually not bad. All right. Not quite as clean as I'd like it to be, but it'll work. Okay. Now, of course, it's time to connect this section to this section. We have our heat shrink here that we're just going to slide down on this side. Then we're going to trim the wire. And again with the heat shrink. Okay, so we should be done with the soldering bit. But now to test whether or not we connected this properly. So we're going to connect our LiPo to this. All right. All right, so this one is spinning that way, which should push the dart forward, and this one's spinning that way. The only way to actually properly test it, though, is let's go ahead and knock a dart through here. So I have an Ember Strike dart that I'm going to test with here. And this is where it did shoot out. So yeah, ow, that actually kind of hurt when it came out. So yeah, that is connected properly. I'm gonna go ahead and actually get the shell back on here, and let's see about putting it together. Okay, so first thing I want to show you all is how this actual rev plate works. So it comes with two pieces. It has this orange spot, which actually replaces the mechanism here. This is the stock one. You pull that out, and you're pretty much set there. Now, the next piece is this black piece, which you actually have to lay down first, and it fits snugly right there. So you don't have to do any shell cutting whatsoever. That just hugs right there, and you are set to go. You keep, of course, your original rev trigger, and that is it. Now, what you do want to do is you want to actually unscrew these screws here, because these are going to go inside of your switch. Now, if you've never done a modification before like this, I can't tell you how much time this saves when it comes to using putty or glue. It's actually quite the benefit. It is worth the money that you spend on this switch, or on this plate. Yeah. We are all set. Of course, the cage itself, we want to make sure that we put this up properly. So we're going to put this right here with the actual posts. Make sure that it's flush there. And then as for the wiring, now here's where we might have to get creative with some cutting. Because this wiring is supposed to run all along down here. And it looks like we don't need to cut anything, actually. Not on this part. Well, maybe a little bit. I'm actually going to cut a little bit with my knife right in this little area right here. That way the wires can fit snug between the post and this little section to the side. All right, so we got some tangled wires here, and that's okay. All right, now another thing what you're going to want to do is actually make sure you have a hot glue gun handy, because here's where the hot glue is going to come into play just to hold these wires down. Don't worry about using hot glue too much. I should say it shouldn't cause you any alarm, because again, that's not going to interfere with anything, and a lot of people actually use it. Technically, if you didn't have a switch plate and you didn't want to use putty, you could just put a whole bunch of hot glue in here and create a mold of hot glue, or I should say of glue, and hold the switch in place. But this is more just for the wiring itself. While that heats up, one of the things I'm going to actually let you all know that my intention to do is that I'm going to be pulling these parts out, because this wire is going to go underneath this bar and it's going to be glued down here, so that the XT60, or I should say the XT30, is stretching out. Now I'm seeing here an issue. I did not have enough red wire for my XT30. So I might actually have to rewire a little bit, but that's okay. It's not going to be too much of a hassle. Let's go ahead and actually take care of that, and I'll be back. Okay, so I am back, and I went ahead and added a little bit more of wiring here. So this means that this should extend all the way out to here when we feed it through, and it does, because right here is where the actual battery tray is at, and that's where our LiPo battery will be resting. So we're good there. Now, what we're not good, though, is that this actual plate itself, the size of the stem that I have for my actual rev trigger, is a little too long. So when you press down on this, this post is going to get in the way. My way around that is by just shaving down a little bit around the post itself. We're going to go ahead and do that now. Just very careful. And so that's activating the switch, but I just want to be safe a little bit here, and we're going to cut a little bit off of this side here. Yep, that's what I was worried about. I want a little bit more. All right, so that should have no problem revving at all and releasing, which is good. The reason that I wanted to do this is because you run into, yes, you could jam this down and you could get this switch to actually activate, but the problem is that there's not enough pressure to deactivate the switch, so you would be revving eternally and draining your battery. Now, of course, when we actually put the blaster together, I'm going to make sure to get all these shavings out of there. Let me actually go ahead and do that now really quick. We're going to flip this over and knock out some of those shavings. All right, mess on my table here. Anyways, the next thing we're going to want to go ahead and do is that we are going to want to take care of this wire and set it up properly. Now, I had mentioned getting my glue gun out, so we're going to go ahead and actually do that now and glue down this wiring right here. Again, that should be enough just like that. I will warn you that what you just saw me do, it's something that you want to do only if you have calluses on your fingers. I have burnt my hands so much that it doesn't hurt when I have a little bit of hot glue on my fingertips. If you've never done that before, it does kind of sting a little bit. I want to put this switch back in here. Again, it is not wired at all, so it does not do anything but push this forward. We're going to go ahead and actually disconnect this part here. Run these wires underneath here, like so. I'm going to apply a little bit more glue just down here to hold the wires down to the shell. Oh, that hurt a little bit. Okay. Now, one thing we're going to see here is that this right here, we are going to want to cut this because much like where the battery connector's here, this part actually connects to the battery tray itself. So we're going to use our hobby knife right now, and we're going to just cut that down so we can fit our wires in there. Of course, if you have a Dremel, this is a lot easier, but I'm trying to avoid using the Dremel during this mod video because not everyone has a Dremel tool. Okay. So that should rest easily there. And there is a post here that I believe gets a screw. So we should be okay with just that. Let me go ahead and actually dig just a little bit deeper here. I like those wires to sit flush down because that is a guide post. And I don't want any interference. All right, so let's get this down here. Squeeze that black wire down there. Black wire squeezes in. Squeeze that red wire there. We are good to go. That is not going anywhere. All right, now. So we are pretty much ready to go when it comes to screwing everything down. First, of course, we're going to want to screw down the motor, the cage itself. But after that, I think that we are going to be good to go. Yep, that activates. That has no problem there. Might want to add a little bit more glue just down here to hold these wires down. Oh, I guess I should have done this black one also. Well, let's do that real fast. Let's let that hot glue settle there.
Let's go. What is that? What are you catching on? Oh wow, okay, that is interesting.
So one thing I noticed about this cage is that it is hollow on the inside where the flywheel's at, so we have to be very careful when putting these screws in because the magnetics of the motor are going to actually pull on the screw and not want to drop it in. So you want to guide it all the way in and then screw down. Alright, so one thing I'm actually going to go ahead and do is that I might use some electrical tape to tape these two wires together, only because of the fact that way they're connected together and I can stop them from actually hitting against this flywheel. Yeah, just to be safe, because this is I see problems happening when I close the shell. Or maybe I can actually just glue it to the switch here. Let me see if I can glue it to the switch, since that switch does nothing now. Ow. That burnt my hand.
That hurt. Alright, so.
All right, so now this wire is actually stuck to the switch itself, and that's okay because that switch does nothing. It is just there to hold this forward, so that when the mag goes in, this actually clips into the piece of the magazine that allows it to stay in. Now, I'm going to tell you that this might require shell cutting on the opposite shell, but other than that, we are ready to actually go ahead and put this thing back together completely now. We are all done with this side. So, because that works, that trigger works. Rev trigger's pushed in. That slides back and forward. So we are good to go. Of course, if we had a half dart attachment, we could go and actually just attach it here. That way it would push the half darts forward. But we do not, and that's okay because with flywheels, the standard length darts actually work better unless you have a blaster cage design that is designed for half darts. So we're going to go ahead and actually get the other shell up here now and see what we can do there. Okay, so we're back with the other shell, and there's a few things that we're going to want to do here. So first of all, let's start off by getting rid of this. We do not need this. Well then, this is not wanting to come out easily. I wonder why. Huh. We might have to cut. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and actually get rid of this wire. This wire can just pull out if we twist it enough to get enough leverage. I might need to get a clamp in here. This is why we always need to have the right tools. All right, so sorry for that jump cut, everyone, but we actually had to do a little bit of cutting here. I don't know why, but there was a barb in the actual battery connector here that was sticking to the sidewall, so I actually had to just trim down the wall and, well, had to yank it out with a lot of force. So after I trimmed down the wall enough, I got to where the barb was at, and it was able to pull out. But yeah, so that's basically it. From what I can tell, it doesn't look like we actually need to do any more cutting. So we're going to actually now go ahead and put this thing back together and go from there. This shell is back together. Here's one important test. This is a larger size 3S LiPo. Want to see if we use an XT60 connector, would it fit without cutting anything? Okay, so this is a larger XT60 based 3S LiPo. As you can see, it will not necessarily fit here without any additional cutting. We'd actually have to cut all the way down here to be able to drop this in sideways and then connect the XT30 to XT60 connector. However, the Tattoo LiPo, which is the one that I was actually recommending, the 850, drops right in, and we are good to go. This just fits right here. No additional cutting required. We should be good to go with this. The only cutting that we're going to have to do necessarily is maybe trim this down a little bit. Nope, we are actually going to need to cut a little bit. That's interesting. I do have another tattoo lipo that we can use, but I want to make this one fit. So, okay, so I am back, and I did have to do a little bit of shell cutting. So we actually cut the bottom of the battery tray here, as well as a bit of the sidewall here. So what that's going to allow me to do is that it's going to allow me to take this battery and slip it in here. And it should be able to just slide right down there with a little bit of finagling here. Just like that. So that lipo is secure. It's not going to bounce around too much, which is good. You don't want a lot of bouncing around. Then these two will connect. And then this will close, like so. Now, of course, if you want, you can go ahead and actually get thumb screws for this. They do sell them at Out of Darts for the 3 set. I believe it is, I want to say $2.50 for, or maybe it's $5 for all 3. But it does help when it comes to opening up and closing this. Now, one of the things I will tell you here is that you can go ahead and actually put a lipo alarm in here. I do not, only because of the fact that I never leave lipos inside of here for more than a couple of hours. Most of the games that I run are not that long, and I bring multiple batteries with me. Now, if you only have the 1 lipo battery, you can go ahead and actually put a meter on the actual blaster itself. That is something that is recommended by a lot of people. Me, I can go with or without it. So it's one of those things. If you practice lipo safety, you shouldn't necessarily need one. Because of the fact that I used Krakens, you don't need a MOSFET for this blaster. I prefer to use Krakens and or Fang revamped because you don't require MOSFETs with those motors. So that being said, we are now ready to rev this up. And that sounds powerful. So we're actually going to go ahead and actually run this bad boy through the chrono, and we'll be back. Well, those numbers do not lie. The chronograph says it, and this MA40 is pretty awesome right now. We hit highs in the 180s, and the average was right around the 170, 180 mark, so I am satisfied with this. This is definitely a super stock blaster now, and it is ready to go. Now, I will tell you that if you want something that is more HVZ compliant, I would recommend going with a lower crush cage. Actually, go ahead and actually look up the people at Containment Crew. I have another one of these that I have made, which is HVZ, and that one averages in the highs of 150, low 130. So right around the 138 mark is the average there. If you are using standard elite darts, of course, you can actually lower that down for the 130 level cap by using waffle tip darts. I recommend having one of each, only because that way you can take one into a super stock game and one for HVZ. This is a fun blaster now. Definitely a lot better than what it was stock. So I hope you've enjoyed this modification guide, and that would be Isis or Otis that just fell. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the mod guide. If you did, go ahead and actually like and subscribe, and keep on watching, and most importantly, keep on blasting.